في العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء ونبيهم وخاتم المرسلين وعلى آله وصحابته والتابعين لهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إلا لعلم من حيض أو صباء أو نوم أو إغماء وعقل تبل قرنا نسيان كفر ردة لا سكري وقدر الطول لغير الكفر وأسقط المدرك عذر حصل لا نوم أو نسيان أو إن غفل وقتل تاركها مقر الحد وجاحد وجودها مقر. هذه الأعذار التي تسقط الصلاة وزوالها أيضا يثبت الصلاة.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. These are the excuses that excuse one from the prayer, that make the obligation of the prayer drop. When they come about, and when they leave, the prayer once again becomes obligatory.
لا العذر مثال العذر مثاله مثلا واحد أغمي عليه أو جن أو امرأة حاضت أو نفست، هي قد تكون أخرت الصلاة لعذر وقد تكون أخرت الصلاة لغير عذر. مهم أنه وقع، هل سواء كانت آثمة أو غير آثمة، أو الشخص كان آثمة جاء الجنون، هذا شيء آخر، هذا مختلف. هل هو آثم أو غير آثم هذا لا يمكن أن تبين. هذا سوى.
So first of all, we must understand here that we're not talking about whether they're sinning for delaying the prayer or not delaying the prayer. This is the chapter of the prayer times. First of all, we've understood the prayer times, both the required prayer times and the emergency prayer times. So the one who delays the mukhtar time, which is the better time, the preferred time, or the required time, you could even call it, and then delays until the emergency time, this person, if they do so unnecessarily, then they are sinful. This we have already discussed. But however, that emergency time does exist. The emergency time of Dhuhr ends at Maghrib, just like the emergency time of Asr ends at Maghrib, and the emergency time of Maghrib and Isha both end at Fajr as well. So they have a shared time.
نعم، قال لا العذر من حيض أو صباء لا مناها وقدر الطهر لغير الكفر، يعني أن من زال عنه الحيض أنها كانت صبيا وبلغ، أو كانت حائضة وزال عنها الحيض، أو كان مجنونا وزال عنه الجنون. ماذا نفعل له الآن؟ حيث أنه زال عنه، وكان التأخير للضروري لا يجوز إلا لعذر، فهو كان معذورا فزال عنه العذر، الحيض زال عنها، أو الجنون أو الإغماء قبل انتهاء الوقت الضروري. قد تكون الصلاتان مشتركتين كالمغرب والعشاء والعصر والظهر، وقد تكون غير مشتركة كالفجر فقط هي فقط.
So then now first we'll discuss what the excuses are. There are four, and there are others that can be included in them as well. These four are menstruation, postpartum bleeding, and becoming unconscious and going insane, and then you can say any other type of loss of conscious mental awareness that isn't brought about by oneself, like drinking alcohol or taking drugs. Those are not an excuse. Those prayers, if the person brought themselves into drunkenness and missed because of drunkenness, they still have to make them up. We're talking about the things that will happen, that the prayers that were in while those things came in, those prayers are no longer required. So if a person fell unconscious during Dhuhr time or during Asr time, and even if they hadn't prayed Dhuhr, then since Dhuhr and Asr's time is not is considered one time, and when they return back to consciousness if it's after Maghrib, then neither dhuhr or asr will be required for them at all to make up. They will not be asked as if those prayers never happened in their lives.
فإذا زال العذر كان قبل المغرب كان قبل غروب الشمس زال العذر زال العذر.
But no.
فإذا زال العذر
And the same, the opposite side of the token applies as well. If a woman's period ends, or postpartum bleeding ends, or the insanity of a person stops, or their consciousness comes back, and they are still within dhuhr and asr time, or they became Muslim and it's still within dhuhr and asr time, then both of those prayers will become required. Or in sometime during the night, then both Maghrib and Isha will be required to pray for that person.
No.
Even if Maghrib time has already passed, still it's the emergency time of Maghrib.
No.
They will still. So then, basically, the whole for the prayer time to become excused, for the prayer time to not be excused, that means they would have had to have passed all the time they could pray in, both required and obligatory, both required and emergency time.
أنا طيب قدر العذر لغير الكفر هذه الأعذار إذا زالت فسنقدر الطهر لغير الكفر معناها امرأة كانت حامل وشخص كان مغمى عليه كان مجنون كانت نفساء وبقي من الوقت الضروري شيء فقد يكون الوقت صار قصيرا جدا لا يمكن فيه الطهارة ويبقى شيء خلاص الصلاة.
So then if we're saying that they have the entire prayer time, Dhuhr and Asr, Maghrib and Isha, or Fajr in itself, they have the entire prayer time, then what's the final limit with which it will be considered that that prayer time is gone?
سنقدر الطهر ستدخل الحمام.
It's enough time to pray that prayer before the prayer goes away, or enough time to pray one rak'ah of that prayer before that prayer goes away, before the opportunity is missed. So then, for example, for Isha, it would be you'd have to include Maghrib also. So you'd include all 3 rak'ahs of Maghrib and 1 rak'ah of Isha. But then, whether a person is traveling or not traveling, it's going to be 4 rak'ahs time for Isha to be considered. But then you need to actually add some more time. It's not just for enough time to pray. Because of what reason? When a woman's menstruation ends, when a woman's postpartum bleeding ends, or even if somebody became insane and they stopped. Or a person was insane, then then you have to include enough time for them to, then you add to the calculation of the timing, the purification that they would need in order to pray. So for the woman who is menstruating or postpartum bleeding, then you need to include, then what's the final limit time to be considered catching that time? Enough time for them to make ghusl.
فيبقى قدر ما صلى فيه 4 ركعات للمغرب والعشاء أو 5 إن كانت حضرية للعصر والمغرب والظهر يكون جميع صار فرضا.
Enough time to make ghusl and pray, however rak'ahs are needed to catch the prayer that is being discussed.
فإذا بقي ركعة عن الأولى فمعناها لزمة الاثنتان.
So then, if there's enough time to pray the first prayer and 1 rak'ah of the second prayer, then both prayers are considered being caught by that time. So then if a woman's period ends, for example, in the middle of the night, and there's still plenty of time left, then she would need to make ghusl and pray Maghrib and Isha. Not just Isha, even though it's Isha time already. This continues all the way up towards Fajr. When is it that now the Maghrib would drop off? It's when she doesn't have time to pray to make ghusl and to pray both Maghrib and Isha and 1 rak'ah of Isha. When does that time occur? it's when she only has enough time to pray,
أقل من 4 ركعات.
to make ghusl, and to pray less than 4 rak'ahs. Why 4 rak'ahs? Because that's 3 rak'ahs for Maghrib, and then the first rak'ah of Isha. Because if you catch 1 rak'ah of the prayer, then you've caught that prayer in time. So then if she only has time to pray 3 rak'ahs,
أو ركعتين
or
واحدة.
2 rak'ahs, or 1 rak'ah, then and make ghusl, then forget about Maghrib, then she's considered Maghrib went away, she missed Maghrib due to her what? Due to her bleeding. So then she would only make ghusl and pray Isha. Even if she didn't make ghusl, the only prayer she would need to make qada of is Isha.
وإذا لم تدرك شيئا إذا اشتغلت بالغسل.
And if this means, and if she only had enough time to make ghusl but didn't even have enough time to pray 1 rak'ah,
خلاص.
then neither Maghrib nor Isha are considered caught, and they're considered now missed due to her period, so she is excused from them.
وكذلك الظهر والعصر.
Similarly with Dhuhr and Asr, except with Dhuhr and Asr there is a distinction. Okay, if her period stops during Dhuhr time, then no problem. Make ghusl, pray Dhuhr, and when Asr comes in, pray. It stops. Her period stops during Asr time. Make ghusl and then pray Dhuhr, and then Asr, because Dhuhr and Asr times combined. All the way up until what? The ending time of both, which is Maghrib.
قبل المغرب قبل غروب الشمس
But
بقليل.
then now, if you're talking about the actual, precise, detailed ending time, it's when she has enough time to pray, to make ghusl, and to pray Dhuhr, and 1 rak'ah of Asr. But this gets complicated because of what? If a person is traveling, that means 3 rak'ah times plus ghusl, because Dhuhr is 2 rak'ahs when traveling. So Dhuhr 2 rak'ahs plus 1 rak'ah of Asr, plus ghusl. If a person is not traveling, then
5 ركعات.
then it is 5 rak'ahs, because they would have to pray Dhuhr 4 rak'ahs and then 1 rak'ah of Asr. And the ghusl time is added to that calculation only for the ending of a period and postpartum bleeding and loss of consciousness and insanity.
ولكن الكفر لا يقدر.
But if a person becomes Muslim
لا يقدر له الطهر.
with 5 rak'ahs time but not enough time to make ghusl, then you don't count their purification. They became Muslim during that time, their prayer is obligatory during that time. ويستطيع شخص إذا أراد أن يسلم أن يغتسل قبل أن ينطق بالشهادة وذلك الغسل المحسوب.
صح عليك.
Because a person who, when they're entering into Islam
لكن عزم على الإسلام.
and is saying, okay, they're determined to become Muslim, they can take their shower, then come and say their shahada, and then pray immediately without making wudu or ghusl. So then the wudu and ghusl time is not included in terms of the calculation for them.
They make ghusl first and then take their
Make
shahada.
ghusl and then take
هذا
their
يمكن.
shahada. Yes.
Or
إذا كان
after
عزم
shahada.
على الإسلام. ولا يجب عليه الغسل إلا بالإسلام، ولكن قد يغتسل قبل الإسلام إذا كان قاطع جازم بأنه
And this
سيسلم.
would necessitate that they
جازم على
take
الإسلام
that
ويكفي ذلك
ghusl,
الغسل.
that they are doing it in terms of, I'm going to say my shahada, that's why I'm doing
وقد
this.
أجمع معناها قطع قال أنا سأسلم.
That they said, I will say my shahada. And this is very common, and you find in hadiths that the person took their ghusl, then came and said their shahada, and then.
طيب. نعم. نعم هذه مرحلة اللزوم.
So this is saying now
واحد كان معذورا والآن صار يلزمه.
this is we're talking about now when a person was excused, they were
لا يلزمه
unconscious.
شيء، لا يلزمه شيء.
Nothing is obligatory for them. They were unconscious. They were in a coma for 5 years. They got out of their coma, in the middle of Asr time. Of course, maybe they'll take time to get up and to whatever and to adjust themselves and whatnot. Regardless, they are they will need to pray Dhuhr and Asr when they're able to, if they had enough time to make ghusl and pray all of Dhuhr and then rak'ah of Asr. Or only Asr, if they only had time to make ghusl and pray. And they didn't have enough time to pray both Dhuhr and 1 rak'ah of Asr. Then they would only
What do you mean by 1 rak'ah of Asr?
1 rak'ah of Asr. That's it.
وأن ركعة شيء أقل من 5 ركعات في الحضر أو أقل من 3 ركعات في السفر فلا تلزم العصر.
Because if Asr time came in, let's say Maghrib time came in, while a person was in their second rak'ah of Asr, they're considered catching Asr prayer.
Oh, okay. A minimum of one.
A minimum of 1 rak'ah.
It's not like praying 1 rak'ah.
No, it's not praying 1 rak'ah, but to pray.
Minimum. Okay.
Yeah, to pray at least 1 rak'ah, so they're considered that they had enough time to catch the prayer within the time. So that means that they would consider that they regained consciousness or their period ended with enough time to pray that prayer. Okay, well then that prayer is required. So then obviously if there's not enough time for them to make ghusl and to pray both dhuhr and catch asr also, then the priority is given to which prayer? The later prayer in this case, because that's the prayer that they would catch. That's the prayer that connects with the next prayer after it.
وأسقط المدرك عذر. هاي كنا في الإجزاء، معناها الشخص كان معذورا وصارت تلزمه الصلاة. كنا.
So now we're talking about what excuses that a person was excused, and then their excuse went away in the middle of the prayer time. Which prayers would they need to make up, depending on the time that they regained their ability to pray.
الآن سننتقل إلى السقوط.
Now we're going to talk about the opposite. A person was required to pray, and either due to negligence or due to whatever, they haven't prayed during this time. We're not talking about. Perhaps they would be sinful, like a person who unnecessarily delayed Maghrib, and now Isha time came in. That's a different discussion, whether they're sinful or not. We already talked about unnecessary delay is sinful, but we're not talking about that now. We're talking about what prayers will they be excused from when this excuse comes during the middle of the time.
وأسقط المدرك عذر حصل. الآن العذر هو الذي أسقط المدرك. الآن كان زوال العذر يلزم، والآن صار عذر يلزم.
So earlier we had discussed how when the excuse is gone, now they need to pray those prayers that they were able to catch once the excuse is gone. Now we're talking about they had no excuse, but then the excuse came in the middle of the time. What happens?
وأسقط هذه المسألة على حالها. أسقط المدرك عذر كما أن زوال العذر يلزم، كذلك أيضا إتيان العذر يسقط بقدر الماضي. فمن جاءه العذر، مرأة كانت يعني غافلة أو رجل كان مهلا لا يصلي للأسف، فقبل غروب الشمس تاب إلى الله تعالى أو تذكر أو خلاص يعني، لكنه جاءه إغماء أو جنون، جاء هذه المرأة حيض أو نفاس قبل غروب الشمس بقدر ما تصلى فيه 5 ركعات في الحضر، فمعناها سقطت عنه العصر أو الظهر. وإن كان أقل من ذلك فمعناها أن الظهر ما زالت في ذمته والعصر سقطت، وإن كان أقل من ركعتين فالجميع في ذمته. وهكذا أيضا بالعشاء، فإن كان قدر ما يصلي فيه يعني ركعة واحدة فإن العشاء تلزم، وإن كان أقل من ذلك فالجميع في ذمته. وهكذا.
في المغرب في ذمته.
نعم، المغرب على كل حال في ذمته، ما دام الأمر أكثر من 4 ركعات. فهمت؟ معنى أن الإنسان إذا الآن جاءه العذر قبل طلوع الفجر فننظر، فإن كان قدر ما يصلي فيه 4 ركعات وهو جاء العذر قدر ما يصلي فيه 4 ركعات، معناه أن العذر أسقط المغرب والعشاء. فإن كان أقل من ذلك فإن الخاص بالعشاء، يعني يدرك الوقت العذر والمغرب في ذمته. وكذلك أيضا العصر والظهر، فإن كان الشيء في الحضر أكثر من 5 ركعات فإن الجميع سقط، وإن كان أقل من ذلك في الحضر فقد بقيت الظهر في ذمته والعصر سقطت، وإن كان مسافرا فهو إلى ذلك.
So then the opposite now. A person is going about their business. It's dhuhr time. They went unconscious. They regain consciousness 5 years later, 1 day later, 2 days later, by Maghrib time, after Maghrib time. Do they need to pray that dhuhr?
طبعا هذه كل شيء يحتاج يصلي هذه السنوات كلها.
لا
لا
يحتاج يصلي؟
لا ما مضى، ما يقول؟
لو أغمى عليه.
أغمي عليه قبل
قبل يعني
إيش؟
لو
بعد
شخص
الدخول.
أغمي عليه يعني أغمي عليه في
وسط الوقت
خلاص.
خلاص.
وكل
لكن-
الصلوات التي يعني أغمي عليه فيها يعني إلى
نعم ولو سنين
نعم
ولا كذلك الماضي.
نعم. So then now if a person is going about their business, they fall unconscious at Dhuhr time, they regain consciousness at Maghrib. Do they make up that Dhuhr time? No. Even though when that Dhuhr came in, they were required, they could have prayed it. But in order for them to need to make it up, they would have had to have the entire praying time pass by. Right? The only so basically the same thing goes. If they didn't pray that Dhuhr and the Asr came in, then they were unconscious. They do not make up. Of course, they were sinful for delaying it unnecessarily, but since it was still technically Dhuhr time and they didn't have the full chance to pray it, they're excused from that prayer. Similarly,
حيض ونفاس.
and similarly, if a woman is menstruating, if she hasn't prayed Dhuhr, menstruation starts at Dhuhr time, that Dhuhr time is excused. Starts at Asr time, both Dhuhr
So
and
that's
Asr are
including
excused.
the Mukhtar and the Daruri.
It's including both Mukhtar and Daruri. What is the last limit? So if a person didn't pray Dhuhr and Asr and then Maghrib came in and then they fall unconscious, obviously they need to pray that Dhuhr and Asr because they had the full chance to pray it. So we're talking about if somebody did not have the full chance and what interrupted them from praying was menstruation or whatever. Even if they were delaying the prayer unnecessarily, still the obligation drops. So then what is the fullest extent of that? It is enough time, as we said, for Dhuhr and Asr, for Dhuhr and one rak'ah of Asr to come in before Maghrib. If a person's, do we count ghusl in this case?
Yeah.
Of course not. Ghusl has nothing to do with it because we're not talking about ending of a period. We're not talking about getting up from consciousness. We're talking about
هذا كان طاهر.
a person who could have very well had wudu from hours before, right?
لا يقدر له طهر.
So then there's no ghusl time or wudu time, so this is simpler to calculate. If a woman's, let's say in the most relevant case, if a woman's period starts any time between in Dhuhr or Asr, and she hasn't prayed them, she's excused from both of them. If her period starts any time in Maghrib or between Maghrib and Isha, any time during the night, and she hasn't prayed them yet, regardless whether she's sinful or not, the obligation of those prayers drops. All the way until she has had the full chance to pray. When is that considered? For Dhuhr and Asr, it's considered if she still has enough time to pray 5 rak'ahs, and then her period starts, then she's excused from both. If she has time to pray, if she doesn't have time to pray both Dhuhr and 1 rak'ah of Asr, then now her missing that Dhuhr prayer,
تقدير.
is it because of the period or is it because of her laziness? She just missed it. So that means which prayer does she make up, Dhuhr or Asr? Dhuhr, because that's the first prayer that was obligatory. That's the prayer that connects to the last prayer that she did, which was Fajr. As opposed to the other way around, if her period ends with time only left to pray one, which one is prioritized? Asr, because it's the one that connects to Maghrib and Isha and the next prayers that are coming in. So that's the distinction. If a person's excuse is ending, then you prioritize the later prayer. If a person's excuse is starting, then the earlier prayer is the prayer that is prioritized. If you only have enough prayer time for one. What if you have, and of course you take into account whether they were traveling or not. If they were traveling, then you say, okay, for Dhuhr and Asr, they caught the period caught both and excused both. If they had enough time for 3 rak'ahs, but if they only have time for 2 or less, for 2 or 1, then she would need to make up Dhuhr, right? And Asr would be excused. And if it's not enough time to pray 1 rak'ah, then neither are excused because she had time to pray both before her period.
When you say if you have time for 3 rak'ah, how do you judge that?
enough time. Let's save that question for the end. Just do it because it's already confusing enough of a topic. But that's a great question. So then now for Maghrib and Isha, does it make a difference if a person is traveling or not? No, because Maghrib doesn't get shortened. It's 3 rak'ahs and 1 rak'ah of Isha. So if a woman has her period anywhere from the beginning of Maghrib time all the way up through Isha time, all the way up to almost Fajr time, all the way up until she has enough time for 4 rak'ahs of prayer, then she's excused from both Maghrib and Isha. If she only has enough time for 3 rak'ahs of prayer, that means she's considered Maghrib, she missed it, not due to her period, but due to her own negligence. Therefore, when her period's over, then she needs to make up Maghrib, but not Isha.
This is for Musafir and non-Musafir?
This is for Musafir and non-Musafir because Maghrib is always 3 rak'ahs. Right? So it's enough time to pray Maghrib and 1 rak'ah of Isha. But for Dhuhr is 4 rak'ahs plus 1 rak'ah of Asr, or Dhuhr is 2 rak'ahs. So for Dhuhr you take into account whether they're traveling or not. But regardless for women, if their menstruation starts anytime up until they have time for 4, then they're excused. But if they were so negligent that they didn't even have enough time to pray Maghrib and 1 rak'ah of Isha, that means then when their period is over, they have to make up only Maghrib. But let's say they were so lazy and they just missed their prayers regularly and they just missed both Maghrib and Isha and they didn't even have time to pray, and the period came in and at the time where Fajr Khalas is coming in, there's no, in a few seconds of the night enough time to pray 1 rak'ah,
Make both.
then make both. And to catch Maghrib, to do the 1 rak'ah, we don't mean doing the full cycle of the rak'ah, we mean reading the Fatiha and then saying Allahu Akbar and catching the Quran. That's it.
As soon as you enter.
ركعة كاملة. ليس فقط الله أكبر وسجد. So excuse me, I was wrong. Then it is actually 1 rak'ah, 1 entire rak'ah. حتى الصلاة لو فات علينا مثلا، لو سيفوت علينا العصر مثلا، لو شخص يصلي قبل المغرب ويركع ويقول سمع الله لمن حمده، فلا لم يعتبر أنه أدرك الصلاة. ما شاء الله, I learned something important from you today. I had thought that if you catch
أدرك ركعته لا تطلق إلا ركعة بكامل سجدتها.
سبحان الله.
بسجدتها نص خليل.
Catching with the Imam.
Allah, mashallah. Yeah, mashallah. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, I mean, I literally prayed behind somebody who we were traveling together, and then some whole mess happened, and we had to stop, and we had a big group of people.
يا أدركت معه الركوع لا أدركته.
أدركت معه الركوع.
يا أدركت مع الإمام الركوع أدركته. ولكن هل تعد الركعة أدركت الوقت؟ ذاك شيء آخر.
عجيب سبحان الله ما عرفت. So there is a distinction. So I was half right. So it is if you are left forced to delay the prayer all the way up until you only have time to catch 1 rak'ah of it.
means ركعة بكاملها. هذه إذا ركعة في إدراك الوقت بكاملها وإدراك الإمام بالركوع.
It's just for the Imam.
وأما الإمام بنفسه.
الإمام بنفسه كيف؟
But it's two separate things.
Oh.
One is if you join the prayer with the
لأننا
Imam.
كنا مسافرون وكان معنا مجموعة كبيرة من الناس، فكان صعب أن نجد مكان حتى نصلي فيها ونتوضأ فيه.
طيب.
ففي الأخير أدركنا يعني توضأنا وتجهزنا وبدأنا الصلاة، وقال الإمام لنا بعد الصلاة أننا لو أدركنا الركوع، هذا الذي فهمناه، قبل دخول المغرب فقد أدركنا الوقت وما فات.
لا
هذا غير صحيح. So then the time actually requires catching the entire rak'ah. So it is when you say catching 1 rak'ah, we mean actually not just the rak'ah, we mean the rak'ah with its 2 sajdas.
هي الركعة لا تقال له الركوع، الركعة تأنيث ركعة بكاملها. لابد أن تفهمها. الركعة تقال لجميع الركعات من ابتداء الله أكبر إلى الرفع من السجود الآخر. هذه ركعة وركوع بالعربية معناها انحناء إلى
So even though you're considered catching the imam, if you catch ruku',
هذا خلاص أدركته
that means you caught that rak'ah
مع الإمام
because you caught the ruku'. That means you
مع
caught
الإمام.
it with the imam. But to catch the prayer time, you actually have to catch the whole rak'ah
من تكبيرة الإحرام
From
إلى
the
الرفع من
takbiratul
السجدة الثانية
until completing the second sajda
ترفع
to be
تقول
considered
نعم.
to stand from it.
نعم هذا بركعة بسجدتيها.
Al-rak'ah with its 2 sajdas is mentioned in Khalil.
شوف هذا الباب نعم.
Alhamdulillah عدنا.
هذا الباب اسمعوا هذا 3 أبيات لا تنسي.
Right, these are 3 lines, no more.
إذا قرأناها مختصر خليل يمكن الرجل فيها يوما كاملا الذكي.
If
يوما
we
كاملا.
study this from Mukhtasar Khalil, it will
الرجل
take
الذكي.
an intelligent man a whole day to get through this chapter.
لأجل المراجعة ولأجل هذا ضع هذا هنا وضع هذا مع شيخ ماهر.
This is with a skillful sheikh who will explain this matter to an individual.
فقط هذه النقطة فقط. الإدراك والسقوط الإدراك والسقوط.
This is called idrak, meaning catching the time,
والسقوط.
and suqut, meaning the time has dropped.
وتجد
it's
الشاب
fused.
الذكي هكذا يفعل براسي.
And you find an intelligent young man, you know, just scratching his head like, what's going on?
ماذا نفعل؟ ما هو معنى هذا تعارض عليه. هذه المشكلة مع الناس لا تدرس أصلا لا تدرس لا توظف وقتا للدراسة وبعد ذلك تقع في بطلان الصلاة يوميا تقع في بطلان الطهارة يوميا لأن هي درست وما درست أصلا.
So this is the problem. People, they even those who studied, they didn't study. They are doing things that are invalidating their prayers and their everything on a daily basis.
أنا كان معي مفتي قبل يومين ليلتين تذكر كان جالس في هذا.
Right, there was a
فقال
mufti,
كنا 20 من العلماء كان حقيقة أنا وليس بعلماء.
there was a mufti who was here with me a couple of days ago, and he
قبل
said,
ليلتين
2 nights ago,
صدينا.
and he said that we were just
ما هي نصيحتك؟
or
كنا
we have a gathering of 20 ulama, 20 scholars, and what's your advice for them?
أنا قلت نصيحتي لكم أن ما في من هؤلاء الجماعة ما في واحد يحفظ 20 صفحة ولا 10 صفحات بل ولا صفحة واحدة. فالنصيحة واضحة معناها ليس موجود عالم وليس موجود
I said
عالم.
my advice is that not to consider yourself scholars because not
ولا
a
طلاب
person
علم
there, or even students of knowledge because not a person there memorized even 20 pages of these books,
ولا ننزل إلى صفحة واحدة.
or even 10 pages, or 5 pages, or even 1 page.
فقال نعم هذا صحيح نعم صحيح.
And he said, yeah, well, okay, well, this is the
هل تتذكرون الفصول من هذه الكتب؟
Do you
حتى
remember
الأبواب.
the chapters and the different subjects?
ما فيكم واحد يتذكر ما في واحد يتذكر الأبواب من الكتاب الذي مر عليه.
Nobody even remembers what chapters they covered in the books that they studied.
فقال سبحان الله. سبحان الله. سبحان الله طبعا سبحان الله ولكن هذا فساد. هذا فساد في الأرض.
So of course, subhanallah, but this is subhanallah corruption.
سبحان الله هذا فساد في الأرض. وكله مر على المكتبة الإسلامية كلها مر على المكتبة.
And all of them, they studied the entire, mashallah,
ما
Islamic
مر على
library,
المكتبة الإسلامية ولا يعرف منها صفحة واحدة.
but they did not retain from it even a single page.
صفحة واحدة.
وهذه الامرأة شيخ؟
هذه المرأة جاءتنا قبل أيام تعرف الصف. مرأة جاءتنا إفريقيا مسكينة أفريقيا زمان سنين دخلت في الإسلام. الشاب هنا قال لها يعني أردت أن تصلي على كرسي. فقال لها الصلاة لا تصح على هذا. يا قوية البدن تسوق سيارة وتسوق من هنا إلى الصين. فقال لها لا يصح. فجلسوا فقال لي ما هو الرأي؟ قلت له ابحث عنها في الطهارة والصلاة هي لا تشغل نفسها بما لا فائدة. فقال لها هناك شيء طهارة الغسل والوضوء. قالت فما هو الفرق بين الوضوء والغسل؟ أول شيء هي أخذت كرسي هي أقوى من أبي جهل قوية البدن. أنا لو صارعتني لرمتني في الخارج. قوية البدن أقوى مني ب20 ضعف. جاءت بكرسي لتصلي، قال لها لا تصح على الصلاة. فقلت له دعنا من الكرسي، تكلم معها، أنا قلت له أنا تكلم عن الطهارة، ما هي فائدة كرسي ولا كرسي. فدخلوا في مجال، فقالت المرأة معه زوجته يخبرونها معا هناك فرق بين، فقالت ما هو الفرق بين الوضوء والغسل؟ قالوا لها الفرق بين الوضوء والغسل كذا وكذا وكذا. فبعد ساعتين أو ثلاثة الجلسة ارتفعت، يور رايت برادر يور رايت، ولكن إمامي ما قال لي هذا، معناها لا نؤمن بشيء من هذا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
She was rejecting it, يعني like she's not going to do anything.
لا هذا حقيقة.
My imam didn't say that.
هذا هو خاتمة الأمة. 3 ساعات مرضى، وبعد ذلك يور رايت برادر يور رايت، ولكن أنت صادق في المقص، لكن الحقيقة تكلم. هذا هو الحقيقة. لا تضيع ويست باي تايم.
So, subhanAllah, there was also, then if there's the state of the scholars and the teachers, then what's the state of the students, then if the scholars don't memorize the single chapter or even the titles of the chapters, or even understand it, then the student, this woman who said her shahada 8 years ago, she came, and she's been everywhere to every masjid, and she came, mashallah, sat down in a chair for her fard prayer. And she is much stronger than me. You know, she could toss me around if she was going to wrestle me. She's she could throw me with one hand. And she prayed on the chair. The brother told her, sister, the prayer is only allowed to pray sitting. If you cannot pray while standing or standing and leaning or sitting independently, or then you can talk about, you know, sitting on a chair. So then I told him, you know, let her go, you know, talk to her about purification and prayer. So then we talked to her about, the brother, mashallah, sat down with her with his wife, and he talked to her for about 2-3 hours about wudu and ghusl. She wasn't able to tell the difference between wudu and ghusl. He sat with her for 1 hour. And after that hour, despite realizing that everything about her prayer was invalid, she said, you know, you're right, brother, but you know what, my imam didn't tell me to do this. As in, like, I'm not going to do this, but thank you for telling me. Are you an imam? Are you an imam?
No.
The brother is not an imam. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
He's only Muslim. ومن أحسن الإسلام أنه ليس بإمام. بس إسلام لا إمام. واحد ما أعطاه الله ليس بإمام فليحمد الله على نعمة عدم الإمام.
And the one who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spared him from being an imam should say Alhamdulillah, I'm not an imam.
واحد مات إمام وليس شيخ في أمريكا وليس معلم وليس مقبولا وما عنده جماعة فليقول الحمد لله الذي عافاني من جميع البلايا.
A person who's not an imam and not a teacher and is an outcast and not part of any community and not part of a masjid and doesn't go to any masjid in America, they should say Alhamdulillah that Allah spared me. That Allah has spared me from all the trials and tribulations. Because all these problems and so on is from the masajid and the schools. Sheikh, ولا نوم أو نسيان. So then we were talking about excuses that do make the obligation a drop off. As in, like, if those 4 things that we mentioned, if they occur, the obligation drops off. And we talked about what happens when it drops off and what happens when the excuse is gone and which prayers are obligatory and not. There are other things that will disable a person from praying that are not considered excuses that drop off the obligation, such as the one we mentioned, if a person becomes drunk or high on purpose, that they're unable to pray, they will still, once they gain their sobriety, pray all the prayers that they were in an inebriated state or intoxicated state. And sleeping also, you know, even though a person, even they sleep from the beginning of the prayer to the end of the prayer, they're not aware what happened and so on, then that's one thing as far as their ruling, but they still need to make it up when they wake up. Or if a person forgot or was unaware and so on, they didn't know the prayer times, they didn't know the prayer even existed, but they were Muslim, then all of it they need to make up.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك. سبحان ربك رب العزه عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. يا رب يا رب يا رب يا رب يا رب المصطفى صلى الله عليه وسلم اللهم اغفر لنا ما مضى يا واسع الكرم. اللهم صل اخبروا بان الدرس بتاعي
Inshallah, this class will be on 12 from now on, at 12 p.m.
بارك الله